Now that the Ahsoka show is just round the corner, it's time to take a look at what might and could happen, especially when it comes to characters. Now, of course, Filoni has mentioned that the Ahsoka show is basically Rebels Season 5, so we can definitely expect the usual suspects. But the one character that I think needs to show up in any shape or form has to be Anakin Skywalker. And the reason for him needing to show up isn't simply because he's a fan favorite or a legacy character. Instead, Anakin needs to make a return either in this season or the next because of how integral he is to Ahsoka's character. Taking into consideration that Anakin was Ahsoka's mentor and was very much her guiding principle for much of her formative years, Ahsoka and Anakin's relationship is one I would consider somewhat unresolved. Even with them officially parting ways in the Clone Wars when Anakin was still Anakin, their stories continued on into Rebels with Ahsoka finally discovering what happened to her former master, all of which culminated in the explosive duel in Rebels at the site of a Sith superweapon. Following the duel and Ahsoka's escape thanks to the help of Ezra Bridger, the two of them would never meet again. In fact, any updated details on their relationship would only be brought up in The Mandalorian following the death of Anakin. And much of what we learned here is all about how Ahsoka views Anakin's story as a cautionary tale, part of her reasoning as to why she refused to train Grogu. We also see Ahsoka acknowledge Anakin as a good man and a great Jedi who fell victim to his own fears. Besides all these little details, not much else is given, and I honestly can't help but feel that Ahsoka's relationship with Anakin remains somewhat unresolved. Given how close the two were with each other and how much Ahsoka's upbringing stemmed from Anakin's teachings, it doesn't seem right that the chapter on their relationship close off screen. Not to mention, during Ahsoka's duel with Vader in Rebels, a huge element of the fight was not just about Ahsoka finally realizing who Vader truly was, but also having to deal with the guilt of leaving him behind all those years.
I won't leave you. Not this time.
Then you will die.
And I think this is such a powerful moment between the two, with Ahsoka now faced with the reality that the Jedi she once called Master was now the monster standing in front of her. And that from her perspective, there could have been the possibility that Anakin wouldn't have fallen to the dark side had she decided to stay with the Jedi Order. Now, of course, we as the audience know that that wouldn't have been the case had she decided to stay on, but Ahsoka herself doesn't really know that. And this idea that she would view Anakin's fall to the dark side as a personal failure of her own is such a great plot point and beginning of Ahsoka's next stage of growth, giving us the opportunity to potentially watch her come to terms with her own guilt and how that manifests itself in the events around her. You could even argue that Ahsoka's refusal to train Grogu in Season 2 of The Mandalorian wasn't just due to the fact that she was familiar with Anakin's story, but possibly a sign of a guilty conscience. Her refusal may not just stem from what she's seen, but also due to the belief that she was partially responsible for the downfall of her own mentor. And so we could interpret her refusal to train Grogu as a sign that she might not believe in her own ability to train others. Now, we could of course say that she is no longer a Jedi and therefore wouldn't want to train others, but The Mandalorian has shown us that she isn't adverse to the idea at all. And so her no longer being a Jedi is not the main reason for her refusal, which allows us to potentially explore this guilty conscience of hers down the line. But The Mandalorian doesn't really delve any deeper into this element of Ahsoka's character, and so we're sort of left to speculate whether this is true or not. But coming back to the main point of the video, I think if Anakin were to show up either as a ghost, a distant voice, or even a flashback, it would go a long way in finding closure for the two characters. It would neatly tie up a decades-old relationship and story in a way that would help Ahsoka reach the next stage of her character. The Ahsoka right now, I would argue, is slowly moving from a Jedi Master to a Jedi Grand Master, and her coming to terms with her relationship with Anakin and letting go of that guilt could be the way to do it, allowing her to overcome one last barrier so that her character can unleash her fullest potential. Now, of course, you might say that the plot points are far too similar to that of the Kenobi show, as that was also about him letting go of his inner guilt, coming to terms with the fact that Anakin made his own choices, no longer blaming himself for Anakin's fall. However, while there might be thematic similarities to the Kenobi show, Ahsoka could still differ in the fact that Ahsoka would be dealing with it after Anakin's death. Unlike Kenobi, who was able to come to terms with Anakin's fate face to face, Ahsoka won't have such means to get over her guilt. And so what we could instead see is Ahsoka struggling through this guilt by dealing with the legacy of Anakin, both as a Jedi and as Vader. And I think Ahsoka having to confront her past and the after effects of Anakin's decision as Vader could be an interesting idea to consider. Her having to witness the atrocities and horrors Vader committed all over the galaxy as she travels from worlds to worlds could be an interesting way to do it. Given the numerous acts of violence Vader committed all over the galaxy, it wouldn't be too difficult to find. And facing these acts of violence could lead Ahsoka to feel even more guilty for leaving the Jedi Order, perhaps misguidedly thinking that her decision to leave the Jedi Order allowed Anakin to fall to the dark side, and as such, these atrocities committed by Vader are partly her fault, resulting in her further internalizing that guilt, allowing the show to bring out deeper, more raw emotions from the stoic character Ahsoka is at the moment. And I really believe that if it's done correctly, these moments can really showcase the depth and complexity of an older Ahsoka. Having gone through the journey that she has, an older Ahsoka would bring with her not just more experience, but potentially heavier emotional baggage than she would normally let on. To the world around her, she might appear to be this wise Jedi Master in control of everything, but deep down, her guilt over how Anakin turned out continues to make her unsure. Not to mention, it also goes hand in hand with the main antagonist of the show, Thrawn. With Thrawn being one of the few individuals in the galaxy knowing Vader's true identity as Anakin, this could very well be a weapon he uses against Ahsoka, especially on the psychological front. Given that Thrawn is someone who likes to know his opponents inside out, Thrawn might be able to recognize this link between Ahsoka and Anakin, with her being his former Padawan and recognizing the guilt Ahsoka still carries with her, essentially engaging Ahsoka in a psychological warfare that would be able to counter her combat abilities, confronting her with Anakin's past as Vader to essentially unsettle and unbalance her. It would certainly be the sort of strategic mastermind thing that Thrawn would do against his enemies, and if this is indeed the case, it would be a great way to get Thrawn involved in the overall plotline while also setting up a growth opportunity for Ahsoka's character. And so that's why I think that Anakin should return to the Ahsoka show, albeit probably in a brief moment. I just think that it would add a whole lot to Ahsoka's character. It's also a possibility that Anakin doesn't even make a return until later seasons, so he might not even show up that soon. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. As always, I am the Lost Acolyte,
And I have spoken.